I welcome you back to our continuing study in the Gospel of Matthew. We are working our way through the Matthew chapter 26, an important chapter, needless to say, in the Gospel of Matthew and in the story of Jesus. The movement from, the Jerusalem triumphant entry to his arrest and his betrayal. This is where we find ourselves. So at the end of Matthew chapter 26, we are going to read verses 73 to 75 from the Amplified New Testament. After a little while, the bystanders came up and said to Peter, You certainly are one of them, for even your accent betrays you. Then Peter began to invoke a curse on himself and to swear. I do not even know the man. And at that moment, a rooster crowed. And Peter remembered Jesus' words when he said, Before a single rooster crows, you will deny and disown me 3 times. And he went outside and wept bitterly. Let us put 2 facts together that are generally true for most people. One is that we are not always honest with ourselves. There is an element of the human condition in which that we are not honest with ourselves in terms of what we think, feel, or believe. We are not always honest in terms of why we have come to certain conclusions or act in certain ways. We have areas in our life that need to work on, but we have the ability to justify why we will not change those areas. We understand change is not easy. We are used to the way we are, and it can be very difficult to break habits, mindsets, etc. In other words, because we have suffered a life of abuse, because we are of whatever nationality, you know the stereotypes that are said. If you're this nationality, you have this type of personality, so on and so forth. Or because we were an only child. In other words, we can always find reasons why in certain areas of our life we are the persons we are. The second fact that we have to deal with is that the most devastating thing for most people is when they see themselves for who and what they are. In other words, when we peel back the justifications and go below the surface, you see, most of us are not honest about who and what we are. Look at Peter in this passage. What was the issue? Was it that he failed to take a stand for Jesus? Was it the fact that he could not even stand up to a scullery maid? You see, I get the sense that what hit Peter like a ton of bricks was not the fact that he betrayed Jesus, and it was not the fact that he basically could not stand up to somebody who, by the society of their day and age, was not someone of significance, important stature, and standing. I think what hit Peter like a ton of bricks was the fact that he saw himself for who he is. What Peter came to face with was with who Peter was. You see, Peter in a moment of time saw himself for who he really was. And what I'm getting at is that Peter, like so many other people, had put on and crafted over the years a certain and particular image that for public consumption of who and what he was, and the betrayal that he did, the inability to stand up for Jesus. This brought all of this crashing down. He was no longer the braggart or the cocky, I got it all figured out type of person. You see, what Peter saw was what he was, and it was ugly, ugly, ugly. Jesus, in that sense, did not have to rebuke him. In fact, if you go into John chapter 21 and the restoration of Peter, one of the things is we do not see Jesus rebuking Peter, because I think Jesus understood that Peter gave himself a far greater whipping than what Jesus could have ever done. You see, what Jesus could have done was nothing to what Peter did to himself at that time. One of the great issues of struggle through the history of the church is the question of what it means to speak of the final judgment. Now, obviously, in one paragraph, I'm not going to tackle all the issues, but I want to look more or less in and through Peter's example of one sense of what the final judgment is. We recognize that in the history of the church, there's always been people who want to downplay the finality of the judgment and teach that God's love will redeem all people in time. Now, I would argue to you that on one level it is bad theology, but while that is true and correct, that is not the real problem with it. The real problem with those people who deny the reality of the final judgment is that they're not dealing with the reality of the human condition. You see, I would say it is a horrendous understanding of the human psyche. You see, in Peter's failure, we grasp one aspect of what the final judgment is. The final judgment is where we come face to face with who and what we are. Our sins are stripped, excuse me, of the self-justifying veneer we give them. In the final judgment, people see who they really are and what they have become. Can anything be more devastating to finally grasp what you have become? If you recreate Christianity in a rational form, then the life of the faith is about growth and knowledge of who Jesus is. It is about what we can know and understand about Jesus. Notice that the focus is, in that sense, out there. If we are to grasp what biblical faith is about, you have to see how the life of faith is about the journey of self-discovery. Read the story of Abraham and his pursuit of God. In that pursuit, Abraham was finding God, no question about it, but also discovering what type of person he was. And guess what? Newsflash, Abraham was no saint when he started on that journey. It goes without saying that Abraham had his flaws. The life of Christian faith is about the discovery of who Jesus is. But we cannot come to a deeper understanding of who Jesus is until we come to see who we are. A genuine faith journey is a journey of self-discovery. And as Peter found out, that is by no means always a positive thing.